Welcome everybody to today's Paleolakes seminar. Our speaker for today is Shah Parth from the University of Haifa, Israel. And the title of today's seminar is Late Holocene Climate Reconstruction from the Southern Arabia, a tale of two monsoons and two lakes. Okay, so the format of today's seminar is we have a welcome announcement, which is happening right now. And after this, we will have a 30-minute talk, followed by a moderated question and answer session for approximately 10 minutes. And our today's speaker has confirmed their availability for tea time session. So we specifically encourage students and postdocs to engage in this tea time talk. And our questions host today is Remat. So please, if you have any questions, send them via chat to questions@Paleolakes host. So a bit of housekeeping before we start. At Paleolakes, we value the participation of all folks interested in the paleo sciences. Please remember to abide by our code of conduct during today's seminar. And please mute yourself during the entire duration of the talk. And you can ask questions by chatting to the questions@Paleolakes host or by using the raise hand function. If you face any technical issues during the seminar, please report the questions to our questions host for today. And we also have inbuilt closed captions, enabled closed captions in the Zoom. So you can use the CC button to show them. And we would encourage you to nominate an outstanding early career researcher using this link. And for your weekly feedback form and demographic info is also encouraged, and you will find it in the chat window. So today's speaker is Shah Parth. And Shah Parth has done his BSMS from the Indian Institute of Science, Education and Research in Mohali, India. And currently, Shah Parth is working as a PhD student from the University of Haifa in Israel. So with this, I would let Shah Parth take over the screen share, and the floor is entirely yours.
Thank you very much. Okay. So I will get started. Thank you for this wonderful introduction, and I welcome you all to my seminar talk titled Late Holocene Climate Reconstruction from the Southern Arabia, a tale of two monsoons and two lakes. Here are the contents of the talk. I have divided my talk into 5 parts, where I will give a brief introduction on the project. Then I will discuss various methods and proxies that I have used during my studies. Then I will display some results from 2 sites, lake sites, which are Lake Khail al-Bazal and Lake Karif Shauran. And finally, I will conclude the presentation. Now, since last few decades or centuries, we are witnessing various climatic shifts in these current time scales. So debate is not whether there is a climate change or not, but debate is that whether these climate change are natural or anthropogenic, man-made. So in order to answer these questions, we need to look at past climatic records. But who do we compare with? Should we compare the modern climatic data sets with Pleistocene, Holocene, which time period is like the ideal? So the long intervals like Pleistocene and these have their own advantage. However, I would like to focus on more on the recent Holocene climatic changes. So in this slide, we see the temperature change that happened during the Holocene. So Holocene is divided into 3 fractions, early, mid, and late Holocenes. But recently, there have been work shown in past 2000 years of climate. As these in past 2 millennia, we have witnessed various globally recognized events like medieval climate anomaly as well as little ice age. Moreover, this famous graph that was published in 1999 by Mann et al. Has mentioned that the current temperature that we are mostly entering into is even higher than the temperature reported in the medieval warming period. Hence, it is very important to study the short-term climate changes that happened during late Holocene or past 2,000 years. Here we see the data sets from P-HIDA database, which help us understand the climate variability of last 2 millennia. As we can see, there are many records in Northern America, in Europe, as well as in Southeast and East Asia. But if we look closely, we see there are no records in Arabian Desert or as well as Sahara Desert. So results from this stimulation have provided that volcanic forcing is the major driver of climate variability in last 2 millennia. However, more works needs to be done and more area needs to be explored to conclude this hypothesis. That brings me to the motivation of my research work, which is first whether we would like to know whether the climate of Arabian Desert is well documented during late Holocene or not. What controls the position of ITCZ boundary and its impact on the local rainfall pattern? And how does globally recognized events like MCA, LIA, and Roman warming period has impacted in Southern Arabian Desert? In the left part of the figure, we can see various Holocene records that has been reported over these past years. However, there are not many records during late Holocene from Southern Arabian Desert. Now, in order to understand paleoclimatic changes, one has to understand first modern climate system and more specifically more modern precipitation changes. So this graph represents the average precipitation that's happened over the whole Arabian Desert from 1970 to 2010. And what this graph indicates that the northern Arabian Desert mostly receives rainfall during months of winter, which is December, January, and February, whereas the southern Arabian Desert receives most of the moisture during two seasons, which is spring, that is March, April, and May, and during summer season of June, July, and August. Now, this modern precipitation data doesn't provide a comprehensive picture of climate change happening in the region. In this slide, you can see various extreme events that has happened over the past decade or something. We have witnessed various snowstorms in Saudi Arabia. There is a flooding, there is dust storm, there is flash flood at the same year. So what does it indicate? That this indicates that there is a special inhomogeneity in the climate data sets due to limited availability of meteorological and paleo data sets. Now, if we specifically talk about Yemen, as mentioned earlier in the slides, that Yemen should receive the rainfall during months of spring or summer season. However, in the year 2019 and 2020, there was an extreme precipitation event during winter season, and that led to locust infestation and resulting into food insecurity in the region. Now, if we look at the monsoon system that is impacting Arabian Desert, there are two major monsoon fronts that impacts the local regional climate. The first is Indian summer monsoon, which is active from months of June, July, and August. And the second is East African monsoon, which is active during spring seasons of March, April, and May. Now, these two monsoon system heavily relies on the position of ITCZ boundary shown in the figure. Whenever the ITCZ boundary move more northwards, we see more contribution from Indian summer monsoons precipitating over Yemen, whereas whenever it moves southwards, the precipitation decreases from both the fronts. During the winters, we see more winter Mediterranean cyclones impacting the northern Arabian Desert, whereas the northeast monsoon impacts the Oman regions. That brings me to the research objective of this work. So the first objective is to increase the spatial availability of paleo data sets for better understanding these two particular monsoons, which is Indian summer monsoon and East African monsoons, and to delineate possible hydrological links associated with these changes. To understand the role of ITCZ boundary and its impact on the regional climate. And the third, which are of our objective, is to test and develop various climate-sensitive proxies like ostacods, biomarker, chironomids that has been successfully applied in various other parts of the world in tropics or subtropics, but are not like commonly applied in regions like Yemen or arid regions. So we need to test them first and to estimate the response of climate change on the lake ecosystem. Now, coming to the site selection, we decided to work on two sites in Yemen. The first lake is a karstic paleolake called Ghail el-Bazal, which is situated in the Hadramaut province of Yemen. The second lake is Karif Shauran, which is a volcanic crater lake. So these two systems are completely different, and we want to understand how we can reconstruct paleoclimatic changes using these two distinct, different kinds of lakes in the region. Now, the general methodology normally includes the extensive fieldwork with the collection of short and long cores. We also collected various catchment samples, various water sampling, as well as vegetation sampling. So to calibrate your proxies, and then you can apply them into the lake sedimentary record. We first did the visual inspection and the identification of various lithological units in the core first. And then when you brought them into lab, we used various chemical proxies like XRF, XRD, TOC, which basically determines the source and transport mechanisms of the sediments. We also used physical proxies like grain size, MSCL, and frictional porosity, which can give you estimation of depositional environment in a lake basin. And we use other biological proxies like ostracoid chironomids and biochemical proxies like lipid biomarkers, which we use to understand the biochemical and biological processes in the lake basin. So first, I will discuss the results from Lake Ghal el-Bazal. The Paleolake Ghal el-Bazal is situated in the southern Hadramaut province of Yemen. The geology of this lake region is mainly characterized by metamorphic and anti-metamorphic units. The region is surrounded by various rocks like conglomerate, rhyolite, quartzites. The region is marked by various karstic sinkhole, and this lake is situated in one of these sinkholes, which is formed due to dissolution of gypsum and limestone. Currently, the lake is completely like dried up because of the withdrawal for irrigation purposes by the town community. During the field exploration in 2001, we retrieved three sedimentary cores from this particular Paleolake system. After we have the working half, we stored this code in a lake core facility in Minnesota. Now, coming to the most important part of this study is to get the chronology of this particular lake. We did this using 5 radiocarbon AMS dating on the terrestrial fragments like wood, twig, and plant remains. And the age goes to 1200 years in the past. We also try to understand the lithological various units, which are mainly comprises of sandy silt, clayey silt, and silty sand. And then we move on to the results. So I will just give you a very general idea of the results. And if you have any other questions, we can discuss at the end the interpretation of these proxies. So first we started with the non-destructive techniques like micro-XRF. So micro-XRF gives you the element concentration at a very high resolution. We did it at 1 mm for 3.3 meter long core. We use these two particular ratio, which is titanium versus aluminum and calcium versus iron plus titanium plus aluminum. The ratio of titanium and aluminum is used to estimate the detrital influx into the lake basin. So during the higher wadi influx into the lake basin, we are getting more titanium, detrital element like titanium. And during the higher intervals of calcium, we have witnessed the lowering of lake level. We also measured various other proxies like MSCL and TOC values. We have the preliminary interpretation here that during the higher detrital element phase, we are getting more ordinary matter into the lake basin. Now, in order to understand the transport mechanism, we used grain size approach, and to analyze this approach, we used n-member mixing model, and that give you like various 5 different n-members, and among them, I'm showing 2 representative n-members. EM1 is the finest n-member, which represents the clayey silt fraction. So during the higher datated influx phase, we are getting more finer sediments coming into the lake basin, whereas EM2 represents the dust input. So during these higher dust input phases, we are seeing less dated influx as well as lower lake levels. Now we compared our results with various global forcings like solar insolation, and we have witnessed that this global forcing is showing a good correlation with our data sets, meaning during the higher solar insolation years, we are getting more precipitation in the region. And to sum it up, this whole study, we have identified 2 globally recognized events, which is medieval climate anomaly, which is characterized wet in this part of the world, and a little ice age, which is dry. We compared our results with records from around the Arabian Desert area, which is one in Saudi Arabia, other one is Kenya, and other is in Gulf of Aden. And as we can see, our high resolution data sets also tells the same story, where we see that during MC intervals, we are getting increased rainfall in a precipitation regime, whereas during LIA, we are getting less precipitation in this particular part of the world. Now, the second phase of this project is to understand the impact of climate change on the lake ecosystem. In order to do that, we have used 3 biological proxies, which are lipid biomarkers, ostracods, and chironomids. Now, previously based on chemical and physical proxies, we have identified which intervals are wet and which intervals are dry. So we would like to know how this paleoclimatic changes has impacted the biological and biochemical processes in a lake. For biomarker analysis, we used lipid biomarker approach, which is N-alkanes. So N-alkanes are ubiquitous, and they are formed by various aquatic as well as terrestrial plants. We can disentangle their sources based on their chain lengths. For example, terrestrial higher plants produces C27 to C33 plants, where C33 N-alkanes, whereas aquatic plants produces mid-chain lengths, which is C21 to C25, whereas algae or bacteria produces lower chains, which is C15 to C21. And we use these 2 particular proxies as mentioned in the bottom of the slide, which is P aquos and tar. So in this particular lake, we have seen that during MC interval, where we have marked there, it's a wet interval, we see higher abundance of aquatic plants or contribution from aquatic plants during MCA, whereas during LIA, we are getting more contribution from the terrestrial sources. This is because during the MC interval, there is more wadi influx, or due to which we have more fresh water, which is nutrient rich, that brings a lot of nutrients and results in the increased production of aquatic plants during this interval. The other biological proxies that we have used for this particular lake setting is ostracods. Ostracods are small size arthropods, and their shells are made up of calcium carbonate. And we have identified 4 major species in this particular lake record, which are Fabio miscondona, B. lineata, Vestinula, and Limnoc3. Now, this particular species called B. lineata is a swimmer species, which means they thrive under more freshwater conditions. And we see during the increased precipitation phases like MCA, the abundance of B. lineata is more, whereas during LIA, we are getting more abundance of miscondona as well as Vestinula. The other biological proxies that we used is chironomids. Here we see during the intervals of MCA or the higher precipitation regime, the chironomid productions are very low, whereas it increases when there are dry interval phases. This is because the concentration of chironomids, which are basically dependent on the dissolved oxygen content in a lake, meaning which is a limiting factor. So during the wet phases, we are getting less production of chironomids, whereas during the higher lake level, sorry, the opposite. During the lower precipitation level, we are getting more production of chironomids, whereas during higher precipitation, we are getting less abundance of chironomids. To sum it up, the study from Lake Galal Bazar, we see during the wet climatic conditions like MCA, we are getting more freshwater influx that leads to more like aquatic productivity in lake, reduce in salinity and production of more ostracod species like B. lineata. Whereas during dry climatic intervals like LIA, we are getting more salinity as the lake level reduces. You have more dissolved oxygen, and that leads to more chironomids production. So now we move to other lake setting, which is Lake Karef Shauran. The lake is situated very close proximity of Gulf of Aden. The volcanic crater lake has no inlet and has two major minor outlet that becomes active during high lake level stand. Hence, this lake can be an excellent for studying the paleo precipitation changes. The walls of these lakes are quite steep and is mainly composed of basaltic olivine-rich rocks. So during the same year, 2001, the field expedition was done, and they retrieved two sediment cores. And based on visual inspection and the sediment proxies, we generated 1 meter composite core. The lithology is divided into five major units, which have identified various alternating evaporite-rich and organic-rich layers, volcanic ash-rich layers, as well as turbidites. The chronology is based on three radiocarbon ages, dates on the ostracod shells. The age depth model was done using Bayesian statistics in a Bacon package in RStudio. That brings me to this new technique that we employed in this particular study. We used Eagle Micro XRF, which basically does the XRF of each lamina. In the previous studies in Lake Gail El Bazal, we just used micro XRF. Here we used this Eagle micro XRF to understand what our laminas are made up of. So these Eagle micro XRF generates these profiles of major elements which are shown, which is calcium, iron, potassium, strontium, and calcium, and they designate a color, and the increased abundance of these color indicates the more abundance of that particular element. For example, if you have more chlorine, and chlorine is majorly indicative of like a halide-rich layer, whereas calcium and strontium mainly indicates the presence of aragonite-rich layers. Now again here, the multi-proxy approach like micro-XRF has revealed the increased and decreased intervals with physical weathering marked by higher and lower values of potassium versus titanium. We also did MSCL measurements as well as TOC and mineralogical investigation. We also found halite as corroborated by our previous method of Eagle XRF. And we confirmed that presence of halite indicates the lower lake level, as halite is the evaporite mineral. Now, we also did biological proxies in this particular lake setting. We used alkanes here, same as previously. In this particular lake setting, we see that more aquatic plants are contributed during the lower lake level stand, whereas we see higher contribution from terrestrial higher plants during higher lake level stand. We also did ostracod analysis for this particular lake setting, and for this lake record, we can only identify one ostracod species, which is Cypradis torosa, which is a Eurohaline species. And not only we measured the ostracod density, we also generated a semi-quantitative estimation of salinity changes using the sieve pore morphology of this particular ostracod species, where we see that the morphology of deep sea pores, as shown in the rightmost figures, it changes when the salinity increases. And based on the transfer function, not only we can like qualitatively estimate the changes in salinity, we can quantify to how much the salinity has been changing. And we see that the bottom part of the core, we are getting more saline conditions. So to summarize these results from this particular lake setting, we see that intervals with higher lake level and lower lake level, higher lake levels are marked by increased weathering in the from the catchment. We see more abundance of TOC values. You have more contribution from terrestrial plants and the decreased halite concentration, whereas dry intervals are characterized by decreased weathering, reduced TOC values, increased abundance of halite, as well as increased abundance of ostracoid density. Not only we reconstructed paleoclimatic curve from this particular lake setting, we identified various globalized events like Roman warming period, late antiquity little ice age, medieval climate anomaly, as well as little ice age. And we have correlated these results with various global forcings like solar and volcanic forcing. Now, to sum it up, the paleoclimatic inference from both these sites. So, in one side, we have 4,000 years of paleoclimatic records from Lake Karif Saran, and the second lake goes up to 1,200 years. Now, we try to relate these results with various forcings, as I've discussed earlier, like solar, volcanic, as well as ENSO variabilities. So the initial hypothesis of these various stimulation that has been previously reported is that the late Holocene climate is mostly governed by volcanic forcing. However, we would like to add that not only volcanic forcing is one of the reason, but also it's a combination of various solar forcing as well as ENSO variability. Now, one of the other factor that could govern like various global climatic driver is the role of ITCZ. As previously shown by various other studies, is that whenever the ITCZ boundary moves more northwards, we see more contribution from Indian monsoon into southern Arabia to central Arabian desert, whereas whenever it moves downwards, we see less rainfall in that particular region. So there are two ITCZ boundaries proposed by two different studies, which during the Holocene, which is, as you can see in the figure. However, in late Holocene, it must have not moved that much northward. It must have moved between like the central to southern part of Arabian Desert, which could have which could have resulted in increase in precipitation in the Yemen region. The other regional climatic drivers like Red Sea convergence zone can also impact the precipitation in southern Arabian Desert. The RSCZ is a semi-permanent convergence zone that is generated due to the difference in the northern and the southern Red Sea temperature. They produce strong current which flows from Red Sea to southern Arabian Desert and precipitating over the region. During the summer months, the RSCZ can intensify and shift more northwards, leading to increase in rainfall in the parts of southern Arabia as well as Horn of Africa. So to sum it up, there are more studies needs to be done whether the increase in rainfall is because of Indian monsoon as well as or from the East African monsoon. That is one of the area that we would like to target in the future. However, to submit this study up, we have generated a comprehensive picture of continental scale climate variability in Southern Arabian Desert. We have identified various events like MCA, LIA, ARWP in this part of the world. We have also linked these changes with global forcings like solar and changes in the ITCZ boundaries. We tested and developed various novel proxies to estimate the impact of precipitation on the lake system. Overall, this study should help understand the role of ITZ and its impact on the regional climate. Moreover, more studies and more stimulations and more time series analysis should be done here to for the understanding more seasonal prediction in the southern Arabia. With that note, I would like to thank all my collaborator, which is basically have like governed like push this project forward. Special thanks to my supervisor, Professor Nicholas Waldman, like other collaborators like Dr. Ilaria Mazzini from Italy, from James Russell from Brown University, Dr. Anupam, Professor Daniel, and other colleagues that has helped in this project. And I would also like to acknowledge other funding agencies that has funded this particular work, which is Israeli Science Foundation and IES Postgraduate Grant. And with that note, I would like to thank you all. And if you have any question, feel free to ask here or write it in the chat. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you so much for your talk.
Yeah.
And let's start with the questions. Okay. So okay. So our first question is, with the current warming trend, what would that also imply a wetter South Yemen?
Yeah, that's actually a very excellent question. So answer to this is yes, there is increased warming trend or more rainfall pattern that has been witnessed over the Yemen region, which is quite unique because when and it basically associated with the Red Sea trough. Initially, the studies have shown, like meteorological studies have shown, that Indian monsoon was one of the biggest driver of the modern climatic changes, or sorry, paleoclimatic changes. However, in the recent years, we see the more contribution from the Red Sea trough. Now, why it's happening, how it's happening, what is the reason behind these is still needs to be studied. Yeah.
Thank you. Our next question is from K. Sendor Sarwan. And Sendor asks, are the GDGT data corresponding to Lake Gayal and what do they show?
So we have not done GDGTs, but we have only stick to lipid biomarkers. So the GDGTs that I shown was published by Tannery from Gulf of Aden, which I compared to for the regional because I wanted to compare my records with the existing records. So the GDGTs from Gulf of Aden doesn't signifies any changes in the sea surface temperature, but as I mentioned, they are like marine records. So marine records doesn't usually records these small climatic shifts. Like lake records are even better. So yes, I agree that we should employ GDTs for future works, but currently we don't have the facility of doing GDGTs in my work here.
Um, our next question is from Amy Ollendorf. And Amy says, you've done a ton of great multidisciplinary work. Thank you for sharing. Is there, if any, archaeological data correlative to the paleoclimatic data?
It's this is the thing that I would like to focus on in my thesis. It's an excellent question. So yes, there has been many archaeological data sets, and there was a paper published in Science by Fleetman, if I'm not wrong, which basically talks about the changes in the local cultural changes with respect to climate. So they have mentioned that late antiquity, little ice age, during this particular time period, there was an collapse in the local cultural transition that led to fall in the kingdoms in Western Yemen. So yes, there are, and I'm trying to gather all these informations, but yes, there is a need to do more studies on these, but the problem is the availability of archaeological data sets from this region. So yes, that would be an amazing way to go for. Yeah.
Our next question is, can N-alkane data be used to track whether specific flora were predominantly C3, C4 based? And if so, can they be used to find out the predominant photosynthetic pathway in the lake?
Yes, so definitely we can use analkane indices like ACL or CPI. That basically ACL will be better because the C4 plants has more higher ACL values. But what I have seen in my data set is that there is not major shift in the local biota or the changes in the vegetation. However, currently we are doing the delta 13C on the compound specific isotopes, which can give more idea on the C3, C4 changes in the region. So yeah, whenever we have this data, we would be happy to publish this particular work also if we find any changes in C3 or C4 in last 4,000 years. Yeah.
Okay. We have a few more questions.
Sure.
Yeah. Yeah. So the question is, how does your data compare to other regions close by to your sample localities? And does diagenesis affect your data? And if so, what impact does it have on your interpretations?
So again, it's we have compared our results with the records from around, but as I mentioned, there are not many. In whole Arabian desert, there are like few like caves and two cave records and one lagoon from Saudi Arabia. So as far as that I have like searched, like we have seen a good correlation with the existential record. But as I mentioned, these records are my records is much more high resolution. So we can have I can conclusively say that the changes that we are observing around the region is more corroborating with our existing record. It means that the data is quite reliable according to me. Other thing is about diagenesis is there is very less chances of diagenesis in this particular lake setting because we tried to calculate the maturity index in this particular lake setting and it was quite lower. So there was not much chances of diagenesis, but however, we have included in our interpretation. But yeah, thank you for pointing this out.
Okay. Um, uh, our next question is, how would the chemical composition of freshwater influx in the monsoon affect lake ecosystems?
Sorry, can you repeat? I was reading the question in the chat. Can you repeat
Sorry.
again?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the question is, how would the chemical composition of freshwater influx in the monsoon affect lake ecosystem?
So, based on the work, like the water samples that we collected during this field work, we have analyzed that pre-monsoon, water is much more has much more less nutrient, like less TP values, less amount of I guess that's not the conclusive, like less amount of organic matter coming from the wadi influx during the monsoon season, pre-monsoon season, whereas during the monsoon season we have witnessed that there is more organic matter contribution during the wadi influx. However, because this wadi is like a short river, it's not there throughout the year, so it normally changes in these current climatic conditions. So yes, it's a good suggestion, but we have some water samples that we analyzed. We did hydrochemical investigation on few samples, and there are some published materials that we have used as like a reference for our interpretation.
Okay. We have a question by Amy Ollendorf in the chat box.
Yeah.
Are you familiar with the work done by Dirk Verschassen et al. I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing the last name, from the University of Ghent in Belgium in Africa. Many of the same proxies which might be useful for you in Arabia too.
Yeah, I'm quite familiar with his work in Lake Chala. It's an ICDP project, if I'm not wrong. Correct me if I'm wrong. So we have tried to use the same proxies just like him, except for GGGTs. More, we are also employing other proxies which Dirk has not used in his studies, also like copostanols and other things to understand the human influence into the lake ecosystem. So that work is already in the process, but right now we our current focus, because this lake record is quite like younger compared to Lake Chala record, which is like quite older. So definitely we have our like constraints on the availability of the sediments, because these samples were collected in 2001. So we don't have much more samples to explore with. But I agree with Amy's suggestion. Thank you very much.
Yep. And this is the last question for today's seminar. How will your data be useful for future monsoon activity prediction with respect to helping communities in the region your samples are from?
Yeah, this is like one of the major motivation of this work is because, as I mentioned, there are not many meteorological stations in these regions. So definitely, what my outcome of my work can be defined as, we I have applied various time series analysis and other like various stimulation, which indicated that every 7 to 10 years we are getting changes in the precipitation, like we are witnessing very extreme events from flash flooding to dry climatic events. So definitely we can prepare ourselves for the future monsoon activity if we know that okay, the last extreme event was around like let's say 2010, so you can expect something in 2020. But yes, more like data assimilation needs to be done in this part of the work. Other than that, about the local community, which I think is one of the reason is that if we can understand distangle the whether the rainfall is coming from East African monsoon or Indian summer monsoon, it looks, it's not a very, it's a very challenging, but if we can do that, we can help the community by telling that okay, you might get more Indian monsoon during summer season, so you can plant your crops accordingly in because Yemen is kind of like an agriculture, more agriculture active than the rest of the neighbor. So you can plan them ahead that okay, you are getting more rainfall during Indian summer monsoon, or you're coming doing more rain during East African monsoon, which is in the spring season. So they can plan accordingly.
So making them more aware beforehand,
Yeah.
helping them plan out.
Yeah.
Okay.
That is like a global picture if we can think of in the future.
Sorry. Yeah. Okay. I will take over the screen share from you. Thank you so much for your lovely talk. And
Thank you for inviting, by the way.
yeah, the pleasure is entirely ours. So thank you everybody for joining us, and please fill out the weekly feedback form that you will find in the chat box so that we can get to know you a bit better. And we'll be on a hiatus from next week onwards, and seminars will resume January 30th, 2024. So see you next month. And to those who are still hanging around, we'll meet again in during tea time. Before we start tea time, here is a tea time question for you. So think about it while we are on the 2-minute break. So the question of this week is, if you could live in a lake or a cloud, where would you live and why? And while you think about that, let's start the timer for 2 minutes. So just feel free to walk around and grab yourself a little drink and come back again for a more informal session with today's speaker. So